Hi, welcome to Shedunnit, Crime Writing with Helen Jacey. This episode I am talking about the character of June. So June's a really fascinating character because she is a seamstress with big ambitions to be a Hollywood dress designer for the movies. Will she achieve her dreams? She's a fascinating character because it's through June that I'm really able this week to think about what women felt about their bodies, their image, and the whole negotiation of gender identity for women in the 1940s. So you might be thinking, what on earth does that have to do with crime writing? Well, we represent gender however we create characters and whatever gender we give them. And I think because there are so many female characters in my novels, and the 40s had a very rigid gender code and a very kind of extreme gender binary, if you like. June is one of those characters because she is interested in designing women's outfits, making them look good. I can use her to think about how she felt about herself and how she feels about her self-esteem and why she's motivated to do the job that she does. Okay, so who is June? Well, she's from Oklahoma and she stays at the Miracle Mile Hotel, which is where Elvira Slate winds up when she first arrives in Los Angeles. And June is a really big-hearted character in that she is one of those people who will always have your back. She is non-judgmental and she's very, very kind. She sees the good in people and she wants the best for people. She is non-malicious. She is very gentle. She's just a good person. And I think in crime fiction, you've got to have people that kind of represent the whole scale of morality that your stories are reflecting. So for me, June is pretty up there as a kind of good character because she's so solid and stable. Now, all our characters have flaws and they all have internal wounds. June has body dysmorphia. It's very, very difficult for her to live with, but she does channel her feelings about herself into her dress designs. So I don't think she would be able to talk about being ugly or feeling overweight, but June is going to be someone who becomes successful businesswoman. She's going to run her own shop and she's going to be supported by others to do that, and that's a nice ending for June. Now, to some extent, the 1940s, you could call it a rape culture because the sexualization of women was completely normalized. I've got a little magazine here, Ballyhoo. It's full of innuendo. This is written for men. You know, people could buy this on a newspaper stand. Men could buy it. So there's a lot of jokes in here, you know, about nudity, sexual put-downs of women, complete, you know, women in underwear, women sort of bending over, some naked women. And this is for sort of male pleasure, and they could just buy that. Nothing existed for women equivalently, probably, unless they were creating it themselves. So this kind of normalization of the sexualization of women for male appetites and male desires, this was, you know, in women's faces and it was normal. So women had to really tread a fine line on their own behaviour and expressing their own desires in the 1940s. In other words, it was pretty taboo. When we're thinking about cultural values, when we're writing historical fiction, we can think about, okay, so I want to represent something authentic. So women would have been more obsessed with how they looked. They would have been more aware of how they presented themselves just because it was such a critical culture. But I think the sort of seeds of the radical feminism of the 70s, were they planted in the 40s? Because the daughters of adult women in the 40s, some of them would have gone on and pushed this movement that really did reject conventional beauty. I think today, now we see beauty and fashion as something that is our relationship with ourselves. People shouldn't judge us. We can do what we want, how we want, and everything's fine. But I think when you're looking at a polarized gender culture like the 1940s, you can ask yourself, was beauty another form of entrapment of women? So I am fascinated by June's psychology because in a way, you know, designing fashion, it's a bit like playing dolls. I really like the concept of the kind of broken doll. Here's a little 1920s or 30s doll I've got. And she kind of symbolises to me the fact that it is just all superficial, and that inside we do have kind of wounds and we are complex, and all the dressing up in the world sometimes doesn't actually help. And I think this sort of constant negotiation of identity, loving clothes, loving fashion versus who is my true self, and is all this stuff just superficial and a mask? This is something I'm always thinking about in my books, because I put a lot of fashion in. You know, June's obsessed by fashion. I love 40s clothes. I don't always look like this, but occasionally for Elvira Slate I do like to put my vintage gear on, and I like to kind of, you know, honour the world and honour the obsession. So at the end of the day it's all a big mess, isn't it? Because, you know, fashion, adornment, what does it mean? But ultimately we do try and look our best, rightly or wrongly.